talk about a writer who I've come to really enjoy named Paul Collins. Paul Collins has been writing books for about 25 years now, something along those lines. He's written a dozen or so books, and they range fairly widely from topic to topic, but they are nonfiction, and they generally roughly fall into the category of history, and but a kind of history that is sometimes a little difficult to understand its value, and like what is there to learn from it, and that's the sort of the kind of history that reconstructs a sort of fairly small moment in from the past, a story that doesn't have like sort of deep, broader significance. I don't know, perhaps micro history, micro narrative history, would that be a good term for it? A few of Collins's books center around crimes. They're sort of like historical true crime books. There's one on the a murder that took place around 1899 in New York. There's one on a murder that took place in the early 19th century, actually at Harvard University. And there's one that took place in the year 1800 in New York, where the people eventually involved in the case included Alexander Hamilton, who worked as one of the lawyers on the case when it came to trial. And Collins' other books are similarly, I don't know, recondite. He has a book on what happened to the body of Thomas Paine after his death. He has a book on a short biography of Edgar Allan Poe. Possibly one of his best-known books, insofar his first book anyway, let's put it that way, was called Banvard's Folly, and it's a collection of short histories of sort of famous eccentrics, people who have believed or done unusual things, like Captain Sims, who believed that the Earth might be hollow and its entrance might be at the North Pole, and he went around the U.S. in the 1820 era, giving lectures on his ideas, and Congress even debated whether they could fund such an expedition. Or Josiah Banvard himself, who made enormous paintings. He made these enormous long paintings on long rolls of canvas, which he then mounted on rollers and delivered lectures while standing in front of them. There was sort of an early attempt at sort of like special effects art. So he'd be talking about something that happened in a scene in one of the paintings, and then the rollers would move on, and then the next scene he would it was like a lecture with a very prominent visual aid, and it was a huge success and made him a lot of money. Collins sort of gathers these bits of historical trivia, really, and reconstructs them in great detail. This is his strength as a writer, is he really does his research when he reconstructs one of these famous criminal trials, for example. He's really read all of the contemporary accounts of it, and he's put it all in an easy to follow narrative, which, even though it doesn't sort of have any lasting import, something about sort of seeing reading a meticulously recreated sort of scene from like the human experience, from the human drama, is both unsettling and reassuring at the same time. Like, that's sort of the interest involved in reading one of these books. Collins happens to be a superlative practitioner of this kind of history, but there are others, of course, where a story just sort of speaks to somebody from across time, and it doesn't have an easy to identify import. It usually doesn't concern itself with large scale macro matters, the stuff that we're normally taught as history because it has some sort of relevance to our current world. This is more just like the everyday experience of men and women. And although you can use a narrative like this to comment and instruct on the different forces, um, you can sort of hang more substantive observations on a story like this. You know, you could use, for example, a criminal trial in the early part of the 19th century to talk about sort of the emergence of police and the differences in criminal law. You could talk about, you know, sort of societal expectations for different witnesses, and what that says about, you know, the roles given to like gender and race and ethnicity and religion. You could do all that, and people do, but Collins generally doesn't. He's more of a he's trying to aim more at the effects of like a novel, and I think succeeds more, putting you there and making you sort of feel the weight of it. So he gives you enough background so that you can follow the story, but he's primarily interested in just telling the story, and he doesn't pause a lot to like, you know, draw inferences for what this could teach us. He mostly just kind of wants to present it and then let you judge, you know, of for yourself of what you of what the story might speak to in our own time, or you know, towards, you know, universal human experiences. These are very good books. The research, they're fine reads, and when I'm reading something like them, I'm invariably imagining sort of like, you know, what is the purpose of knowing the details of some, you know, 100-year-old murder case? What is what is gained by gathering some of this experience? And honestly, I'm still not sure I have a very good answer to that question. When you seriously examine the work that you take a lot of pleasure in, as I certainly take a lot of pleasure in this kind of micro-history, this sort of reconstruction of the past for its own sake, and not because it, you know, helps elucidate some element of the present or teaches us some sort of like political lesson or religious lesson or sociological lesson, just like hearing the tale and knowing that this is something like this, you know, no history is perfect, but something like this happened, it sometimes feels more profound than when you're reading sort of the more professional histories that are trying to make large-scale points and establish, you know, the grounds for bigger arguments about like the proper role of government, or, you know, the dangers of nationalism or anything like that. Something about just having a simple story reconstructed and presented well, and seeing some of the constants of human experience reemerge over and over, can sometimes really produce a very profound effect that carries with you as you're going about your daily life, because most of our experiences like this, and even dramatic experiences, are often forgotten fairly quickly. And I don't think this is unique to our time. I don't think that the technologies we have, or like the supposed information glut that we're dealing with, has like accelerated this. I think in general, it's really hard to look to the past and to recall it accurately. It's continually being rewoven into the needs of the present. Last year's troubles are occasionally remembered, but we're pretty occupied in dealing with today's troubles. So when someone like Collins, you know, digs through the archive and presents us sort of a piece of last year's troubles, not with an idea of helping us solve our own, but just sort of holding it up as a bit of a mirror. Sometimes it's the effect of art. History was an art, according to the ancient Greeks. You know, one of the muses was Clio, the muse of history. And I think that even with all of the data-driven history we do, with all the more respect for facts, there's still an irreducible element of art to writing of the past, to choosing sources, to focusing attention, to making judgment calls about what is reliable and what is not. And when you're dealing with matters that are very, very weighty, like, say, dealing with, say, the fallout from World War II, or the effects of the Cold War, or the international slave trade, the disputes are very, very important and felt to be, ethically vital in the modern day. And because of that, there's a great deal of passion and attention focused on these arrangements, and there's a great deal of professional expertise that you need to acquire if you're really going to judge. But when you're looking at something, as Collins almost invariably is, that is of what they call purely antiquarian interest, when you're looking at things that are of purely antiquarian interest and that no one now feels like sort of a living concern for the result, you get a kind of history that seems to be aiming at different things and reminding you that there are different ways to use the past than as the source of material for contemporary argument, that there's almost a kind of a lyrical element that's possible with history, and is more easily achieved when it's on material that we have reasonable evidence for. We don't want to completely fictionalize, but that also no one is deeply absorbed in challenging these particular events, or in shaping them to a particular contemporary agenda. I may have made these Paul Collins books grist for some observations of my own, but I stress that he's a very fine writer, and a lot of fun to read because of this sort of like he assumes the inherent interest of his topics, and he doesn't struggle to impress you with their importance. He does all of his research. He reconstructs things in a sort of first-person way through archives that not a lot of historians do, which leads to some of the sort of novelistic effects. His crime ones are a lot of fun. The one about the murder at Harvard is called Blood and Ivy. The one about the murder in the late 19th century New York is called the Trial of the Century, which is a very clever title because there have been so many of those, and this was one that was named that by the newspapers but has been completely forgotten. There's a lot of good material in that one about the role of the new tabloid press in figuring out sort of what its material would be and what its audience wanted, and how they helped create the idea of the celebrity murder trial as a just general concern for a lot of people to follow a story that many people will be interested in for days and weeks. And his book on the Hamilton and the Alexander Hamilton involved murder case, which, oh goodness, I'm afraid I might have forgotten the title of that one. Anyway, that one's very good too. His biography of Poe is very fun. Banvart's Folly is great, since it's these multiple segments. You can just read little pieces of it. You've got bits about plant breeders and these unusual 19th century cranks, people who came to believe unusual things, like that blue light, light refracted through blue window glass could help heal various illnesses. People like this are always with us, and it's fun to read about some of the historical examples of them. What else does he have? He has a memoir about his time living in England and working at an antiquarian bookshop there called Sixpence House. He has a book about autism, Adventures in Autism, I believe, where he digs into some of the historical cases that may have been early examples of autism when it was still basically an unknown condition. And just in general, he's a lot of fun. He also edited for McSweeney's books a small run of reprints of sort of forgotten, unusual books, which he got them to bring back into print. A number of just very strange titles on very unusual matters. I think they did 6 or 7 of those, and it was called like the Paul Collins Library. If you can find any of those, they're definitely going to be strange and unusual and wondrous. And Collins just generally gives the opinion of the kind of person who's, nothing makes him happier than digging around in some dusty archive full of material that no one else has looked at in 50 years and coming out with some sort of treasure. And that kind of historical literature, that sense of like, look what I've found, oh my gosh, it's just infectious. You can feel his enthusiasm for figuring these things out and telling you, what remains mysterious about this long case, and what we can reasonably establish, and what the fates of the various protagonists are. I just really enjoy this kind of antiquarian literature now and then, and he's one of the top practitioners of it today. So here's wishing that he continues, and that we get more of these fascinating sort of deep dives into humanity's mostly forgotten past.